Did anyone try to practice their hypnosis on other people? I mean, if Siddhartha can hypnotize, that's different. You weren't trying on Alfonso, like.
Did you know Alfonso's enlightenment? He's achieved it. Is that what he's classic? He doesn't desire anything.
Well, has he been able to like leave the cycle here?
He's like, please, that's not desires your death. He's like, from existence pain. That was making that dinosaurs. It's like becomes Savannah.
All right, so for part one, what are we thinking here so far as initial? Just kind of start off with initial reactions, whether it could be as it pertains to plot, if there is one yet, characters, overall reaction as like a reader. People will talk about after reading it, like, I feel like I need to self-examine where I am in my life and what am I looking for, what am I searching for, and things like that. It's kind of tough to still talk about at this point because we are so new into what's happening with the book. I will say for part two is obviously a lengthier part. Your version of the book, I think, goes up to page like 122 or so. So you're looking ballpark, 85 to 90 pages. More will certainly happen. You'll have more characters. I think you'll find more traditional elements of like a plot taking place in part two than what we have in part one. And time is also going to get manipulated a lot more. Now, it's only been 4 chapters. It has been multiple years, because Siddhartha's with the Samanas for 3 years. So it certainly has been more than just a couple days. But you're going to have parts in part two where, it'll jump 10 years or 15 years and things like that. So I think part two is easier to kind of look at the book as a whole. But part one, you certainly still kind of get an idea, a sense for what Siddhartha's like. And I think you kind of start to get a sense, at least for what maybe Hess could be potentially trying to do as an author. What do you think?
Yes.
Him or like just the book? Okay.
I didn't think I would dislike it, but it's like.
Is it speaking to you? What?
I don't want to say the whole thing sounds like big cone, but it does. Like it's kind of written that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, like K-O-A-N.
Yeah. Not a C-O-N-E.
Not like.
Look at that. Those literary terms are starting to come in now. I think the overall style, it's not dramatic. It's fairly formal even. When you compared to like a Cuckoo's Nest or a Catcher in the Rye kind of thing, it's a formal style, which I think kind of gives it some kind of sense of an aura to it, some seriousness, some gravitas. But I think it's also very simplistic in nature. I like the overall kind of rhythm to it, where I would describe it as being kind of lyrical, where there's not a poem necessarily, but there's a lot of like parallel structure. And so it's easy to kind of go along with. So I think the formality of it, the overall style, and it sounds kind of weird to say this, but the writing kind of creates some credibility where at least for me, I take it maybe a little bit more seriously than if Holden were standing at the corner of, Park Avenue and whatever, talking about whatever's going on with his head in the Catcher in the Rye. Are we getting anything message-wise yet? Or hinted towards a message? Hinting towards a message.
It's like forging your own path.
Okay. Giovanni. The character that tends to be most, Siddhartha is most talked about, but the character that tends to get the strongest reactions, positive and negative, sometimes tends to be Govinda, where people will look at him as he is a total waste of space. He serves no purpose, whatsoever. There's nothing that he really brings to the book. And I think kind of with that, people will argue that he doesn't do anything really on his own accord. where he simply blindly follows Siddhartha around, so he's not someone that you kind of, hey, that's the guy who's going to take his own stand. So I think sometimes folks look at him as a little bit of a weak character. Argument against that would be, well, he does decide to go follow the Buddha.
He's very sad about it.
And why is he sad?
Because Siddhartha's not having
And when he makes the decision to go follow the Buddha, I think it's pretty safe to say that what does he assume is also going to happen? Siddhartha's going to go along with him, and when Siddhartha does it, it's like, what, huh? You're not coming with me? Why?
Why not?
What's going on?
Why not? You will do good on this path. But why aren't you coming? You will do good on this path.
What word gets used with Govinda quite a bit? Emma? Shadow. In some ways, this is definitely a literal meaning. Not that he is a shadow, but he is certainly attached to Siddhartha at all times. They have grown up together. He has always been with him, and throughout his whole entire life. There's certainly, though, as we move forward, kind of keep an eye on this, and I think it'll become a little bit more apparent in part 2. There's a little bit of a symbolic nature that's going to go along with this as well. We didn't get to talk a whole lot about Hess as an author, Hess as a writer, and the situation that goes into it. When Hess writes the book gets published in 1922. He starts kind of working on it in 1916, 1917. Hess is from Germany. This is where he's born. If you're anywhere in Europe in 1916, 1917, what's going to be one of the big things that's on the forefront of your mind? You got the Great War, World War I going on. Hess isn't involved in World War I. He's not fighting in it. He's not dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder because of his actions in World War I, but he's still certainly worried about it. It's a very mechanized modern war. It's giving people very kind of gloomy outlook on things. Also in 1916, his son gets a very serious case of pneumonia, hospitalized. He survived, but it's pretty touch and go for a while. His father passes away in 1916. His wife gets committed to a mental institution in 1916 because she is dealing with schizophrenia. And so you have all this stuff going on. Hess certainly starts to go into a little bit of depression. One of the people that he works with, and if you're taking psychology, sociology, you might be familiar with him. One of the people that he works with is Carl Jung. Jung is a person who works with Freud, really gets into the whole idea of conscious, subconscious, collective unconscious, all these kinds of ideas, which we'll probably talk more about when we get into book 2. What is Siddhartha's overall goal? And I think what Josh said here is pretty good, that you have to kind of forge your own path. As you do kind of begin to forge your own path, some things you kind of start to have to leave behind a little bit. If we were to classify, where you are in life right now, what would kind of be a general term or stage that people would use to describe you folks?
Suffering.
That's lifetime. That's not certain area.
Still in this system. I don't know. That's a
High school, teenage years. What's the next level? What's the next step for many? College. And as college, you'll be young adult. After college, besides debt,
career.
and maybe grad school, more debt, compound debt.
Yeah.
Rich and famous.
We decided that Sam wrote The Great Gatsby, by the way. Speaking of rich and famous, Jesse.
Huh?
Sam Caliero wrote The Great Gatsby. Because Sam was F. Scott Fitzgerald in the McIntyre performance thing or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like
Or Francis Scott Key. F. Scott Fitzgerald is Francis Scott Fitzgerald because he's a distant relative of Francis Scott Key. F. Scott Fitzgerald names his daughter Francis, so it's like father-daughter name combination. I should have done that. That would be fun. So Sam is really Francis Scott Fitzgerald who wrote The Great Gatsby. You should honor him, despite the fact that he says Giovanni instead of Billy.
yeah.
Anyway, some of you maybe all of you, maybe not all of you. Why do people look forward to college?
Get away from parents.
Independent.
It's not free.
No.
It's not free,
Emotional
Chandler.
freedom. Hey,
Chandler, you're going from
It's freedom.
I think that's what you mean.
Yeah.
emotional freedom.
Freedom, fresh start. And so far as like a fresh start, new beginning, that could be a fresh start from like these people. I mean, Megan has been waiting patiently all these months for me to change seats, and it hasn't happened yet. She can't wait till next year when separation will occur, and then if she goes her path, Jesse will go some other path. Total separation, fresh start. It could be simply getting away from people. It could be location. You know, you might be headed off to California. You're going to go to USC Santa Barbara or something along those lines. But as you move on to something, you tend to leave an aspect of yourself behind. Govinda and Siddhartha are so closely tied that and again, this is a symbolic standpoint, and I don't think it really quite clicks yet because we're so early, but trying to make you aware of it, that the two of them are essentially connected to one another their whole entire life. Govinda is a Brahmin as well, just like Siddhartha, follows him. Whatever Siddhartha says, Govinda basically nods with, will go along all the time. He is his shadow. He simply cannot let him go. But when you're going to be forging your own path, while they're not doing a high school to college, you do have Govinda kind of heading off now with the Buddha going in his direction. Siddhartha, we're not exactly sure where he's going, but he's kind of leaving, his old skin, his old self in a way behind. For him to move into a new stage, even if we do get into a career kind of element for him, part of him has to be left behind. Oops. So you leave an aspect of who you are behind. And that shadow comparison, I think, kind of helps with that. And you could argue the same thing's happening with Govinda, where he has to kind of start to be able to find who he is because he's not going to be having Siddhartha with him. Govinda does come back. We're going to see more of him. Just like how we said with the cats in the rye, pay attention to Siddhartha puts his red hat on. Pay attention to when Holden puts like a red hat on, see where he is character-wise at that point. You want to do a similar thing when Govinda keeps kind of coming back with Siddhartha, because there will be multiple occurrences with it, and certainly the two of them play off one another. So that would be an idea to stick with. Siddhartha, good guy, bad guy, confused guy, neutral.
Seems like a
Well,
good
if you
guy.
go back to like the beginning of the story, he was seen as the greatest of all the guys. Everyone was
He's the one that people look up to. Whether you're someone like Govinda or the young ladies of the area, like Siddhartha would be who they would hope to marry and something like that at one time. If we're going to characterize Siddhartha, what would be words that come to mind? So like, confused or lost would certainly be something that you could use. What else? Flow. Insightful.
I feel like before he met the Buddha and decided to go on his own journey, I don't think arrogance is the right word because he wasn't a bad person or anything. But when he said,
I don't think it's necessarily the wrong word.
yeah, it's when he said because he was really smart and could learn pretty much everything that anyone tried to teach him. And he said how he shouldn't have when reading a teaching he shouldn't focus on pointing out grammatical errors and stuff like that. He should focus on the message of it. And he realized that before he was kind of doing the thing where he was nitpicking teaching and that wasn't what he was supposed to take.
Because pretty much any kind of teaching that's ever happened to him, and you could even argue the Buddha, it happens with him as well. Any kind of teaching has never been enough to satisfy him. So he makes the comment that even as a young not a young man, but like a young person, that he knew just as much as what the other priests would, or the conversations with his father and the other priests, it wasn't going to enlighten him any. The samanas, it doesn't end up doing anything for him, hypnotizing the oldest one there. I've learned enough, I can move on, do my own thing. With the Buddha, he certainly seems to respect the Buddha as a teacher more so than anyone else. But even the teaching of the Buddha, he points out, well, there's a flaw though with this. That how can we kind of explain this flaw? And the Buddha doesn't really give him an answer that's probably going to work for him. So yeah, I would say there is certainly some arrogance. I think, and this would kind of go in another direction, but probably would be related to it. You could certainly argue that he is stubborn. He kind of proves this physically with his whole, I'm not going to move until you let me go, because I'm going to go. Otherwise, I'm going to stand here the whole time. How long will you stand? I will stand. You will die. I will die. You will get hungry. Nope, I'm going to stand. Okay, you can go. All right, see you later. So there's that arrogant stubbornness that certainly goes along with it. But he certainly is intelligent. Is he relatable?
Yes and no.
Like, do you look at Siddhartha and go, I can relate? And by being relatable doesn't mean that Grant is, the incarnation of the character Siddhartha, although maybe he is. But are there things about him that you can go, yeah?
I think because he was thrown into being in his whole social class, being a priest from his parents, and I think that
Okay, so forced into certain circumstances, and obviously those circumstances can change. Grant, you were thinking, yeah, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an extreme form of it, but it's only human to be confused and lost at times.
Remember, questioning the self next year, 12th grade English literature, should you want to decide. Human or natural to be confused.
I think being discontent with being a follower.
What does he want? What's his motive? Motivation, maybe even would be a better word. To be. I would agree, but what? Because he doesn't necessarily want to be the Buddha himself, but what is it about the Buddha that the Buddha has that he doesn't? Enlightenment, nirvana. Listen to that this morning.
I was gonna say news.
Self. So kind of if he is discontent, he wants to kind of be at peace with the self. And I do think, not because of you are all angsty teenagers a la Holden Caulfield, but I do think that this is something that people can find to be relatable, that you simply do want to be at peace with who you are. Authentic, genuine, have an idea as to who we are. Speaking of Holden Caulfield, if you were to say what would be a confused, lost, insightful, arrogant, stubborn, intelligent character that we've read this year, we could talk about the red-hatted kid. Him and Siddhartha aren't all that different, from one another. Now, Holden, his quest is a little bit different than what Siddhartha's going through. But when people will go, I do like Siddhartha or I don't like Siddhartha, I think it's always interesting to compare them to someone like Holden, who we probably have more of a negative reaction to initially, where we complain that he's such a whiny kid. Siddhartha's not all that different from him. And any answer that you give to Siddhartha, he's probably going to find an issue with, similar to the way that Holden would. The problem, or I guess put it more in question form, what is the problem that's going to keep Siddhartha from being able to be at peace with himself, as he currently is? Keep in mind, Siddhartha, we don't know specific age. He's probably right now about 22 years old or so. When the book starts, you and him would be on the same level, and so far as age. Now he's been with the Samanas for 3 years, so he's probably in that 20 to 22, 23 area, range. What's keeping him from being at peace with himself? Because to live is to suffer, and you suffer because you desire. What is then, I guess, Grant, we have to do the follow-up question. But besides going to be at peace with the self, what does he desire?
Oh yeah, the knowledge. Like he wants to.
Yeah.
Desire.
I think that's a good term to say knowledge as opposed to what does the Buddha have? Peace, enlightenment, nirvana. Well, how did you get there? Well, the path that people take is going to be different for everyone. What Siddhartha wants to know is, well, how can I get to that same way? How can I learn to get there? Because where he is stuck, he's going to be stuck in, it's again called samsara. That's going to be the cycle of life where, you constantly keep coming back. So he wants to be able to leave samsara and he wants to be able to get to nirvana. And this would be the flaw, this would be the gap that he talks about with the Buddha, because if life is this big unending cycle, and to attain nirvana, to attain peace means you get out of the cycle, how can you get out of the cycle if you're constantly in the cycle? And if he wants to learn knowledge, obtain knowledge as to how to get out of the cycle, he can't obtain knowledge because knowledge is going to be a desire, and desire is what's going to keep you in the cycle. Nina looks perplexed. So how do you get something to get you out of there without desiring to receive it? Because if you desire, like, what's the problem with knowledge as a desire?
You can't ever be full of knowledge.
It's boundless, You can be wise and not necessarily have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're simply looking for knowledge, you're never going to be completely satisfied because there's never going to be that end point. So in a way, he's kind of stuck where he is seeking knowledge, where to get here, you have to have something along the lines of wisdom or even maybe contentment. A lot of people will argue knowledge is going to be the accumulation of facts, of information. What's wisdom? What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom?
Yeah, wisdom is being able to analyze.
Maybe the ability to apply your knowledge.
Like people will use the idea that it's the ability to discern, to make a choice. Wisdom, folks would sometimes argue, and this is all subjective. This isn't final. Knowledge is gained through the accumulation of information. Wisdom is gained through experience. How do you know what is the proper discernment? Probably because you've made a mistake and you're wise enough not to repeat those mistakes, or you've witnessed what other people have done. So in a way, what do you have to do in order to become at peace and become wise and enlightened? Probably experience. Everything I think would be a good term to use, and that means successes as well as failures. So it's not that you can just automatically ascend to nirvana and go, oh, I'm there, but you have to go up, and then you're going to go down, and then up and down, and up and down, and you're going to be a sine-cosine graph, which will continue to go or kind of be cyclical until you're able to attain that nirvana. What the Buddha warns him of is knowledge. Your thirst for knowledge, your desire for knowledge could be your downfall, because knowledge isn't something that will get you to nirvana. Keep in mind, knowledge can be communicated. I can talk to you about literary devices. I can talk to you about multiple choice questions. We can communicate that. wisdom, enlightenment, nirvana, oneness with like the whole universe is not something that can be communicated, and that's a human issue that we probably tend to deal with. Big aspect of the book for part 2. We'll still talk about some stuff tomorrow, but big aspect of the book for part 2 to keep an eye on, and certainly Siddhartha's experiences with it, is going to be the river. The river, in some ways, kind of becomes certainly very symbolic, but in essence, it becomes the voice or the communication that is needed for him to hopefully be able to obtain that nirvana. But you know, if someone is trying to get to peace, trying to get to enlightenment purposely, you're never ever going to get there. How does it happen?
You just get there.
Or at the very least, in a different way for all people. It's not something where Emma can explain, this is how I got there. Maybe he is there right now. You know?
That's why he's a
He's gotten out of this whole cycle. He's elevated himself into a special place
where you
Smash
play
Brothers,
Smash Brothers.
where you never lose no matter what. But that whole wisdom, knowledge, conflict is something that's certainly going to be a big part for Siddhartha moving forward. So part 2, a little more with characters, a little more with plot. Tomorrow we'll talk about happiness. Is it
Oh, I will not be.
so you won't be happy because you're going to be at Good luck.
Can we just leave that book?
That's okay.
Yeah, leave them there.
It's cool.
Unlike you.
The algebraic number system actually works so each number has the same amount of angles within the number.
Oh, so 3
Why?
and 3,
Yeah, so
4.
yeah, I found that out a few days ago. So cool.
So you have to write 4.
Yeah, you have to write 4 that way.
There's a book called The Biography of Zero, which is actually a pretty good book, where it takes a look at like the heretical aspect